In 1991, a local newspaper in the quiet English town of Canterbury published a story so unusual that, for several weeks, it became the only thing people talked about. It was not about a murder. It was not about politics. It was not about a missing child. It was about a 10-year-old girl named Emily Carter, a shy, pale, soft-spoken child with dark blonde hair and eyes that always seemed to be watching more than they should, who, during what was supposed to be an ordinary past life regression session, said something that made everyone in the room go completely still. She said she had once lived in Amsterdam during the Second World War. But that was not the part that shocked anyone. A few moments later, with tears running down her face, Emily whispered, "I was in Frank's neighbor." The therapist assumed the girl had simply learned about Anne Frank at school. After all, by 1991, the Diary of Anne Frank had been read by millions of children around the world. But then Emily said something no one expected, something far stranger, something that made her mother cover her mouth with both hands. I knew she was hiding. The story began months earlier in a small brick house on the edge of Canterbury, England. Emily was the daughter of Sarah Carter, a nurse at Kenton Canterbury Hospital, and James Carter, a railway engineer who spent most of his days fixing signaling equipment along the southeastern lines. Emily was an ordinary child in almost every way. She liked drawing houses, hated boiled carrots, collected buttons in a biscuit tin, and had a habit of standing by windows during rainstorms without saying a word. But there was something about her that her family had never been able to explain. Since she was very young, Emily had nightmares about a door hidden behind a bookcase. Not monsters, not ghosts, not anything most children fear. A door. She would wake in the middle of the night shaking, her hand pressed over her mouth, whispering that everyone had to be quiet because the men downstairs could hear them. Sometimes she refused to sleep unless her wardrobe door was fully closed. Sometimes she asked her mother if the windows were covered. And once, during a thunderstorm, when heavy boots sounded in the hallway as her father came upstairs, Emily crawled under the bed and would not come out for almost 20 minutes. At first, Sarah and James thought it was just childhood imagination. Children invent strange fears. Children hear things. Children turn shadows into stories. But then Emily began saying words that did not belong in their house. Dagboek. Achterwees. Still, the Carters did not speak Dutch. No one in the family spoke Dutch. No one knew that Dagboek meant diary. That Achterwees was connected to the secret annex wherein Frank and her family hid. That still meant quiet. Then came the names. Otto. Margot. Peter. Miep. Sarah froze the first time she heard her daughter say Miep at breakfast. Not like a name from a book, but like the name of someone she knew. A few days later, Emily drew a tall, narrow building with dark windows and a canal in front of it. At the bottom of the page, in uneven letters, she wrote, Prinsengracht. James took the drawing to the local library and found the address. Prinsengracht 263. The building wherein Frank hid with her family from 1942 to 1944. Emily was 10 years old, and no one could explain how she knew that. It was her schoolteacher, Mrs. Elaine Porter, who suggested the family speak with Dr. Helena Voss, a therapist in Canterbury known for working with hypnosis and memory regression. Helena was not famous. She did not appear on television. She did not promise miracles. Her office was on the second floor of an old Georgian building near the cathedral, with cream-colored walls, a blue armchair, shelves full of books, and a cassette recorder placed neatly beside a small wooden table. The first session took place on February 12, 1991. Emily arrived wearing a gray coat and holding a small sketchbook against her chest. She looked nervous, but not frightened, while her mother spoke with the therapist. Emily stared at the office door for a long time. Helena asked what she was looking at. Emily answered, "I always check doors first." The therapist wrote that down. Then she asked Emily to sit back, breathe slowly, and imagine walking down a staircase into a safe place. Emily closed her eyes. At first, she described only scattered images. A bicycle leaning against a wall, a canal with dark water, a bell in the distance, narrow houses, curtains, the smell of bread, cold air, Footsteps on stone. Then her breathing changed. Her voice became lower, and she said, "My name is not Emily." Dr. Helena asked what her name was. The girl hesitated. Elst what? Emily frowned, as if trying to read a sign covered in dust. Elst Van Dyke. Sarah, sitting in the corner of the room, went completely pale. Emily continued, "I live near the canal. There are soldiers in the street. My mother says not to look at them, but I look anyway." Helena asked where she was. The girl answered, "Amsterdam." The room went still. It is 1942. From that moment on, Emily began describing a life that, according to her, did not belong to the small English girl sitting in that chair. She said Elst Van Dyke was a daughter of a Dutch printer and a seamstress. She lived with her family in a narrow house not far from the building where Otto Frank had his business. Her father knew people who worked in offices nearby. Her mother repaired clothing for neighbors and sometimes carried messages that were never written down. According to Emily, Elst did not understand everything. She was too young to understand the war fully, but old enough to know when adults were lying to protect her. She knew when someone knocked on the door in fear. She knew when conversations stopped the moment she entered the kitchen. She knew there were names people did not say loudly anymore. Back then, Emily said during the session, even the walls seemed to listen. She said she had seen in Frank before the Frank family disappeared in July of 1942, and was older than Elst, but not by much. Emily described her as lively, quick, restless, a girl who laughed too loudly for a city that had forgotten how to laugh. She saw her in the street. She saw her carrying books. She saw her walking with Margot. She saw her looking into shop windows, as if trying to hold on to ordinary life for just a little longer. She did not look like someone who wanted to disappear, Emily said. She looked like someone who wanted the world to notice her. Then, suddenly, Em was gone. Adults said the Frank family had escaped. They said they had gone to Switzerland. They said it too loudly, too carefully, too often. Elst did not believe it. Not completely. According to Emily, the first suspicion came from small things near the building on Prinsengracht. Quiet deliveries. Windows always covered. People entering with faces that looked too normal. Meat geese carrying parcels. Men looking both ways before opening the door. There was a tension around that building that a child might not be able to name, but could still feel. "I knew there were people inside," Emily whispered. "I did not know all their names, but I knew." Helena asked how she knew. Emily answered, "Because sometimes when the street was very quiet, I could hear the building breathing." The second session took place on February 26, 1991. This time, Emily entered the regression more quickly. She did not sound like a child making up a story. She sounded like someone returning to a place she feared, but could not escape. She described winter in Amsterdam, the cold entering through cracks in the walls, the hunger growing slowly, the bicycles disappearing, the faces becoming thinner, the sound of German boots on the pavement, the yellow star sewn onto coats, the danger of looking at someone for too long. "You learn not to know," Emily said. "Even when you know." That sentence made Helena stop writing. Emily said Elst began watching Otto Frank's building without meaning to watch it. She saw meat come and go. She saw small packages that seemed too frequent. She saw men carrying potatoes as carefully as if they were carrying glass. She saw people enter the building empty-handed and leave with their shoulders tense. In one memory, Elst stood across the canal on a gray afternoon when she saw a curtain move quickly in an upper window. It was only for a second. A face appeared, then vanished. Emily began to cry. It was her. Helena asked who, and the girl said Elst was not certain at the time. The face had disappeared too quickly, but something inside her recognized it. The energy, the curiosity, the way the person in the window seemed to want to swallow the entire world with her eyes, even while trapped behind glass and fear. Elst told no one, not her mother, not her father, because in occupied Amsterdam, knowing was dangerous, and saying you knew could be fatal. Then Emily began speaking about the diary. According to her, Elst never read the pages. She never entered the annex. She never spoke to and after she went into hiding. But she knew there was a girl riding inside that building. She knew because once she heard Miep say quietly to another woman that she writes all the time. Elsh did not know exactly who she was, but she felt it. And she wrote because it was the only way to make noise without dying, Emily said. The sentence hung in the air. Then came the memory that changed everything. August 4th, 1944. According to Emily's regression, Elsh was helping her mother fold sheets that morning when she heard vehicles stopping outside. Military vehicles were not unusual anymore, but this sounded different, closer, heavier, final. She ran toward the window. Her mother grabbed her arm. Do not look. But Elsh looked. She saw men entering the building at Prinsengracht 263. She saw uniforms. She saw people on the pavement pretending not to see. She saw a woman across the street slowly close her curtains. She saw a man remove his hat and press it to his chest, as if he already knew what was happening. Emily began breathing with difficulty. They found the door. Helena asked what door. The door behind the bookcase. Emily squeezed her eyes shut. I did not see it with my eyes, but I felt it. The whole street felt it. According to Emily, there was a strange silence before anyone came out. A silence worse than screaming, as if the entire building had taken one last breath. Then they appeared. Otto, Frank, Edith, Margot, and Peter, the others. Emily said Elsh saw only pieces. A coat, a pale face, a quick movement, soldiers rushing people forward, and looked smaller than she remembered, but her eyes were the same. She looked at the street. Emily whispered, not at me, at the street, as if she wanted to memorize the world before they took her away. Elsh's mother pulled her back from a window, but it was too late. She had seen, and in that moment, according to Emily, a guilt was born that would survive for decades, because Elsh knew. She knew there were people hiding. She knew there was too much movement in that building. She knew it might be there. And even though she was only a child, even though she could not fight soldiers, even though she had no one safe to tell, she spent the rest of her life wondering whether she could have done something. Helena asked what Elsh felt that day. Emily answered, cowardice. Not sadness, not fear, cowardice, because I stayed alive behind the curtain. Then came silence. The story reached a local newspaper through Mrs. Elaine Porter, Emily's teacher. She knew a reporter named Martin Hale, who wrote human interest stories for the Canterbury Herald. Hale first thought the entire thing was impossible. A girl in England, a therapist with a tape recorder, a family frightened by their own child, a story involving in Frank. It sounded exactly like the kind of thing that grows because no one can prove it. Then he listened to one of the tapes. On the recording, Emily moved between her child's voice and another voice that sounded quieter, older, more careful. At moments, she corrected the pronunciation of Dutch words. At others, she described streets, household habits, wartime fear, and the silent rules of occupied Amsterdam with a detail that unsettled him. So Martin Hale attended the third session. It took place on March 14, 1991. Helena asked Emily not to go directly to the arrest. Instead, she asked her to find an earlier memory, something small, something not connected to fear. Emily took a deep breath. She said she was standing near a bakery on a cold morning before and disappeared. Elsh was waiting while her mother spoke to someone inside and passed by with Margot. The sisters were arguing about something ordinary, school perhaps, books perhaps, and talked with her hands. Margot looked more serious, more contained, and glanced at Elsh for 1 second and smiled, not as a close friend, not as someone important, just as one child recognizing another in a world falling apart. She had a smile that did not belong to the war. Emily said. Helena asked if they ever spoke. Emily said only once, according to the memory, and dropped a folded paper near the pavement. Elsh picked it up and handed it back to her, and thanked her in Dutch. Then she said something quick about being late. Nothing important, nothing historic, nothing that would ever appear in a book. But for Elsh, that tiny moment stayed, because later and disappeared. And when people disappeared in those days, sometimes all that remained was one ordinary word spoken on a cold morning. The session moved forward again into the years after the war. Emily said Elst survived, but Amsterdam did not return to normal. Not truly. The streets were the same, but the missing occupied more space than the living. Windows were open again, but some voices never returned to them. People came back from the camps with eyes that seemed centuries older. Others never came back at all. Otto Frank returned, and did not. Margot did not. Edith did not. When Elst learned that and had died in Bergen-Belsen shortly before the war ended, something inside her closed. It was not only grief. It was a confirmation of a fear she had carried since that August morning. I had seen her taken away, Emily said, and now I knew she never came back. Years later, when In Frank's diary was published, Elst bought a copy but could not open it for weeks. She left the book on a table and walked past it as if walking past a forbidden door. When she finally read it, she cried before finishing the first pages, because the voice was alive. The girl who had been taken was still speaking, and that was beautiful, but it was also unbearable. Emily said Elst lived for many years. She married. She had children. She grew old, but she never told the whole truth. Not completely. Sometimes she said she had lived nearby. Sometimes she said she remembered the day people were taken from the building, but she never said the full sentence. I knew she was hiding. That sentence stayed trapped until 1991, until a 10-year-old girl in Canterbury closed her eyes in a blue chair and finally said aloud what Elst had never been able to say. At the end of the session, Helena asked Emily to speak to Elst, as if that old part of her was still trapped somewhere inside. The girl remained silent. Then she said, "You were a child." The therapist asked what Elst answered. Emily began to cry. She says, and was a child too. The room became completely still. Helena took a breath and asked, "Could you have stopped it?" Emily shook her head. "No." "Then tell her that." The girl pressed her sketchbook against her chest. "You could not stop it." She cried harder. Then she added, "But you could remember." After that session, Emily's nightmares became less frequent. They did not disappear entirely. For years, she still disliked heavy boots. She still became pale when someone knocked too hard on a door. She still drew narrow houses with covered windows. But she stopped waking up whispering that everyone had to stay quiet. She stopped asking whether the curtains were closed. She stopped repeating the word Achterwies in her sleep. The Canterbury Herald published a story the following Sunday under the headline, "The Girl Who Remembered the Annex." The article did not claim Emily Carter was the reincarnation of In Frank's neighbor, but it did not mock the case either. Martin Hale wrote that he had watched a child enter a trance state and describe, with an emotion difficult to dismiss, the memories of someone who claimed to have lived near one of the most famous hiding places of the 20th century. The reaction was immediate. Some readers called it nonsense. Others said children absorb more than adults realize. A retired teacher wrote that Emily had probably seen documentaries or read about In Frank without remembering it. A local historian argued that the story proved nothing except the power of suggestion. But there were other letters too. Letters from people who had survived the war. Letters from children of survivors. Letters from Dutch families living in Britain. Some said they did not believe in reincarnation, but they believed in silence. They believed in guilt. They believed in memories that seemed to pass through families, through buildings, through places where fear had once lived. The Carter family refused larger interviews. Sarah did not want her daughter turned into a spectacle. James became angry when strangers telephoned the house. Emily returned to school and tried to be a 10-year-old girl again, but some things did not return to normal. When her class later studied the Second World War, Emily had to leave the room after seeing a photograph of In Frank. She did not scream. She did not make a scene. She simply went pale and asked for water. Mrs. Porter found her standing in the corridor, staring at a closed window. Emily said she wanted the world, and they gave her a room. That sentence was not in the books, but no one who heard it ever forgot it. As an adult, Emily Carter rarely spoke about the case. According to people close to her, she would only say that she did not know whether it had been a past life, an inherited memory, or a story her mind had built around a sadness too old to belong to her. But there was one sentence she never denied saying. Years later, when asked whether she truly believed she had been Else Van Dyke, the supposed neighbor who knew when Frank was hiding, Emily answered, "I did not know if I was her, but I know I felt her silence." And maybe that is what makes the story so difficult to forget, because we can question regressions, we can doubt names, we can say a child absorbed information without realizing it, we can search for a coincidence, suggestion, imagination, unconscious memory, and everything the human mind is capable of building in the dark. But one question still remains. Why would a 10-year-old girl in England cry with the guilt of someone who lived half a century earlier? Why would she fear a hidden door? Why would she repeat words from a language she had never studied? Why would she react to the name in Frank not like a child hearing about a historical figure, but like someone remembering a neighbor being taken away and never coming home? Maybe Emily invented everything without knowing. Maybe Else Van Dyke never existed. Maybe the mind can build entire cities from forgotten fragments. Or maybe some memories are so heavy that they do not disappear when life ends. They remain in walls, in diaries, in staircases, in windows that were kept closed too long, waiting for another body, another voice, another child sitting in a silent room, until someone finally asks, "What are you seeing?" And after decades of silence, someone answers, "I am in Amsterdam. I live near her. I knew when Frank was hiding,